If you have it. Okay, everyone together. Master of all worlds,
all worlds,
highest power,
His power,
merciful
merciful
parent,
parent, compassion,
your presence,
In your
eternal,
presence, eternal one,
source of strength
source of strength for us,
as you have
as
been,
you have been for our ancestors.
we very humbly acknowledge you.
Acknowledge you.
What are we?
What are we?
Life,
What is our life that you have done such great
kindness to us.
kindness to us?
Therefore,
Therefore,
place our appeals
place our appeals before you,
so that you
so
may
that you may forgive and absolve us of all faults and failings.
and unfold
Hearts never become barriers between us and you.
you.
It be your desire to prepare our hearts to feel awe and love for you.
May you listen to
Listen to these words of ours.
and may you open our humble
Our
heart
humble heart,
to the mysteries
of your Torah. May this our study
be a source
be a
of
source of pleasure
your
before your throne of glory, like sweet incense. May you shower down upon us the light of our soul's source, in all the ways by which we find love.
For the sparks of your holy servants, whom
You have revealed these words to the world.
shine,
Sparkle.
may their merit
Their Torah, their innocence and their holiness.
stand
So as that we study these words.
their merit
Their eyes
in the saying,
Open my eyes
that I may gaze into the wonders of your Torah.
the words of my mouth, my heart, you, rock,
My rock and my redeemer.
what is the eternal
wisdom
is now.
Now the knowledge and understanding of the Lord.
and issue forth.
Na 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 Finished reading through page 276 on in the Zohar, and we looked at last week. We looked at a commentary by Rabbi Chaim Vital, and we had a whole discussion about it. And I wanted to just touch base on a couple of things that were said last week that I wanted to add to our conversation, and then I want to also bring up, as I said at the end, another piece of this discussion. But first, I wanted to just add a couple of remarks and reactions to other people's reactions. So last time, Seth sent in a little note in the chat and said, this sounds very much like grist for the mill for Marx's accusation that religion is the opiate of the masses, and that by creating all of these excuses for suffering, it ends up quieting people and keeping them under control. So first of all, besides that, I think, Seth, you came up with another good quote.
Yeah, a little bit more in the spirit of our tradition. You got to suffer to sing the blues. Okay,
so we're gonna hold on to that one for a second, but I wanted to react to the first part also, and say that with all of the work that Reb Chaim Vital is doing to justify and to the suffering that the righteous endure, and to explain it's really actually good, it's great, we should be happy about it. I think that there is a little bit of a distinction to be made between and it's a little bit of a distinction. It's not like this is something that is guaranteed, but what Chaim Vital is saying doesn't mean necessarily that you have to be passive. That was Marx's big accusation, that you should just take it for your own good and keep suffering. Suffering, in fact, don't lose the opportunity to suffer, because the suffering is what's going to purify you, and the suffering is what's going to cleanse your soul, and so on and so on. We're going to get to that a little bit in possible ways to read other things in the Zohar like that. But I don't think it's necessary. I don't think that what Chaim Vital is saying is actually leads to that. What Rabbi Chaim Vital is saying is, be grateful for the opportunity to struggle with your suffering. That God only imposes, and this of course is a questionable statement, but what his statement is, he's claiming God only gives the suffering to the people who can do something with it. And if you're going to be broken by the suffering, God's not going to give it to you. So I think that when we have the kind of use of a doctrine of suffering that discourages the efforts to change things, which actually require a lot of suffering and work and suffering to do, then we've got a problem. But I don't know that Reb Chaim Vital is actually advocating that. So that leads me, it's a good segue what you said about that you can't sing the blues unless you suffer. There was an article in the New York Times. Everybody reads the New York Times, right, on the weekend. So there was an article Sunday, and the title is Jazz Drummer Turns to an Inner Beat. Milford Graves' study of heart rhythms has led to techniques that he uses to treat himself. So I don't know if anybody here has heard of this guy, Milford Graves, percussionist. Apparently, according to this article, he played with some of the greats in the 60s. He played at John Coltrane's funeral. He refused to play with Miles Davis when Miles Davis asked him to play with him. So he was a guy. The article starts like this. In the 1960s, Milford Graves became a groundbreaking drummer in avant-garde jazz, but intertwined with his career had been his constant study of music's impact on the human heart. Now, Mr. Graves, 78, who lives in Jamaica, Queens, has become his own subject. He has amyloid cardiomyopathy, sometimes called stiff heart syndrome. Doctors have informed him that the condition, also called cardiac amyloidosis, has no cure. When he received the diagnosis in 2018, he was told he had 6 months to live. Since then, Mr. Graves said he has come close to death several times because of fluid filling his lungs. His legs too weakened to walk. He remains in a recliner in his living room with a tube feeding machine to his heart, with a tube feeding medicine to his heart, and another draining fluid from his midsection. So here's, I don't know if you'll see it so well. Here is a picture. I don't know if you can see that. He's stuck in his recliner and he's got all these percussion things all over his apartment, and he's got a drum in his hand. He's got an assistant that's with him. But he has hardly surrendered to the illness. Although he is under the care of a cardiologist, he is also treating himself with the alternative techniques he has spent decades researching. And since the 70s, he has studied the heartbeat as a source of rhythm and has maintained that recording musicians' most prevalent heart rhythms and pitches and then incorporating those sounds into their playing would help them produce more personal music. So literally follow your heart. So it's a whole long article. Finally, it says here, in recent months, Mr. Graves has been listening constantly to his own heart with a stethoscope and monitoring it with an ultrasound device he bought on eBay. Turns out I was studying the heart to prepare for treating myself. And he's finishing his research. He's trying to organize it. He's trying to get things to happen. He has an exhibition at the Institute for Contemporary Art in Philadelphia scheduled. It says, Mr. Graves has no idea how long he will live. It could be 3 days, it could be a month, or longer. But he is adamant that he will be strong enough to play live for the show, perhaps streamed from his recliner. Where some might see cruel irony in being afflicted by heart disease, which he has studied for 45 years, he sees a challenge. Quote, it's like some higher power saying, okay, buddy, you wanted to study this? Here you go. Now the challenge is inside of me. So, you can find the article online. But what I think is happening with that person is precisely what Reb Chaim Vital is saying that a righteous person could be doing, right? Is actually saying, "Ooh, look, here is this thing, and it's exactly catered to me. This terrible situation. He's working with both with a complete sense of resignation, but also it's not stopping him from studying it and from working with it and from moving beyond it or through it. So I wanted to just bring that up as I thought an interesting, a pretty amazing story. So that was one thing I wanted to share. I also wanted to respond to a point that Mark made about that theodicy doesn't seem to be such a big problem once we take on the Zohar's picture of God as much more complex, not just a simplistic idea that God is good, and then that's the basis for the theodicy struggles. God is good, then how could there be bad, and so on and so forth. But once we understand that the evil comes from God as well, then the ground is sort of like pulled out from under the theodicy question. Am I being fair in presenting it that way, Mark? Uh-oh.
That was only part of what I said. The other part of what I said was to remind you that last August 6th was the anniversary of Hiroshima.
Right.
And I think, with all due respect, and you know what happens when you say with all due respect, that the story about Milford Graves is an obscenity. The idea that one person can somehow make something good out of unbearable suffering has absolutely nothing to say about the centuries and centuries and centuries of meaningless torment that has afflicted millions and millions of people. I'm sorry.
Okay, I don't think you should be sorry. I agree with that completely. I don't say, oh, good, now we've got this New York Times article and that puts everything to rest. I didn't mean it to be that way. I didn't mean it to be taken that way. And it's good that you're saying that out loud. I totally accept that.
And by the way, in terms of suffering to sing the blues, the greatest female blues singer of all times, Bessie Smith, bled to death because she wasn't allowed to go to a hospital because of Jim Crow. So I don't want to hear stories about people who benefit from suffering as an excuse. I'm sorry.
Okay, so I think that that's an important statement that you're making. And if that's the way it's coming out from what I'm saying, then I don't want that to be the case. I don't want that to be the understanding. I said when I first brought up this text that this was a text that I was putting out not as representing my own point of view, but as something to use, to think through, and you're using it, and you're reacting, I think, in a very strong and good way. I don't argue with you. I'm not arguing with you, but I think that it doesn't take each and every one of us off the hook. The unspeakable, obscene, awful evils and suffering that I acknowledge can make you, unfortunately, just give up. And in the micro level, which is what I tried to mention last time, that's the challenge. Do we give up or not? And that's where I think that a story like that is not, quote unquote, the answer, but it is what the Zohar calls a banner. It's a banner. It's a testament to one person, and it doesn't, this person's life and struggle and whatever he's achieving is not there to answer anybody else or to bring anybody else. Why didn't you do what he did? God forbid. But if it can give strength to somebody else who is in pain and suffering and so on, then I think that there's something to be valued in that. And that's, in the end, what I wanted to say about the theodicy piece was that I don't think the problem goes away. The problem is still there. I mean, that's what I wanted to, come to is, even though the Zohar says that evil comes out of God, that just makes the problem worse in a certain sense. By saying, that God is the author of evil, is to sharpen the problem to an infinite degree. When Abraham challenges God, Abraham doesn't simply say, "Oh God, I get it. You're very complicated, and clearly, that you are the author of all that there is, including evil." He says, "Hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat." What's wrong with you? He says. So I wanted to say, in a gentle way, what you're saying in a very heartfelt way, that the problem does not go away, because the Zohar acknowledges the presence and the reality of evil. So, all right. Again, I feel bad that it came across as a kind of a smug, denial of the problem. I want to look at one more piece here of this statement, which I think is, again, something that doesn't make obvious sense. This is in the second paragraph of what Reb Chaim Vital says. He says like this: our sages of blessed memory explained this in short by saying, quote, "There is no comparison between one who eats of his own and one who eats from others. For the souls before arriving in the world eat there from the Holy Blessed One without deserving such a benefit. But now they eat from their own efforts, for they work hard on the eve of the Sabbath in this world through observing the commandments, and then they eat on the Sabbath in the coming world from what they prepared in this world." So this short paragraph, it has this image of not deserving the benefit, that you have to earn the benefit. And I wanted to pause on that, and I wanted to look at that a little bit more. Because what he's saying is the souls that are in the bosom of God, before being born, before being put into this world, are benefiting from God's nurturance and spiritual light and so on, without deserving it. How can that be? So he says, because they haven't done anything to deserve it. So to me, this is a question. What do you mean you have to do something to deserve it? When a baby is born, does the baby have to do something to deserve the love of the people that brought that baby into the world? Doesn't the baby deserve the love simply by being the baby? The souls that God is holding on to, and that God is generating to eventually place in this world of suffering, the whole time before they get here, how could you possibly say they don't deserve to be embraced by God? And that's the linchpin of this whole thing, right? Therefore, God is doing us a big favor. God puts us into the world so that we can sweat and suffer and earn the benefits of God's goodness. So we don't have to just be on the dole, right? We're not going to be welfare queens and just take advantage of God's goodness. So I think it's actually quite an astounding concept. What the heck is he saying? How does he say that? And I think if we just follow what he's saying, it seems to me that what he's saying is that in being created, if we can imagine these souls as individuated spiritual essences, whatever that means, but as souls, which means that they are somehow, each one of them is like one of us, except that they're still only spiritual, right? So he's imagining a certain set of feelings and consciousness, right? He's imagining that the souls are feeling that they don't deserve God's goodness. So if theoretically that makes no sense, nevertheless, maybe it makes some kind of structural sense in terms of the creation of consciousness. Once we have a consciousness of being other than everybody else, or other than what is, we have our own independence. I think what follows from that could be a sense of then, who am I, what am I? When we start that prayer at the beginning of every Zohar session, we say, what are we? Who are we to have deserved such great kindness from you? So I'm wondering whether this sense of undeservingness, is that a word? Of unworthiness, whether that is rooted in being. And then we have different ways that we try to solve that problem, right? Different ways that we try to address our sense of esteem, stature, worth, existence as we are, which means that the element of judgment, din, makes its appearance right here. Right? Chesed is pure love. Chesed is unjudgmental, overflowing, infinite love. And from the perspective of chesed, there's no question that everybody deserves chesed. From the perspective of that unbounded love, it doesn't even come up, the question, do you deserve it or don't you deserve it? The question of deserving comes from the left side. The question of deserving comes from din. It comes from judgment. It comes from the impetus to judge, to make distinctions, to make judgments, to decide, is this really good enough? So it turns out that duality that we say is within God, in a soft kind of way, it starts right there with the creation of the souls. With the creation of the souls that are, as I say, in God's bosom, already there's a sourness that is percolating within each soul as a soul. Because once it has been sort of chipped away from the infinite, undifferentiated Ein Sof, unboundedness of God, then it becomes conscious of itself, with all of the questions that come up as a result. And that's how paradoxically the response of God to give us an opportunity to earn our stripes follows from God's creation of us to begin with. To create us as a soul, rather than as a feeling, thinking soul, paradoxically, instead of just being like a flourishing vegetable, brings up the aspect of challenge and suffering. This is, I think, where what Reb Chaim Vital is trying to say.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Now I'm really confused. Because we earn our bread by the sweat of our brow as punishment for our sins. Earning our bread by the sweat of our brow is not a reward. It's a penalty for cohabiting with good and evil. That's if you take it from Adam and Eve.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand that once we're in that mess, there are ways to justify our existence by good works, by study, by prayer, by things like that, and it's clear that you have to make a living, because if you just study and don't make a living, you're not as good as a person who studies and makes a living, right? You know what I'm alluding to. But
Yeah.
the vote.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So how do you reconcile the Ur creation story where being in the world is a punishment with the story you're telling? And I'm not saying you can't. I'm just saying I'm confused. All right.
Yeah. So I think that let's take that story and let's think about the moments before the whole thing fell apart, right? Before the fall. So theoretically, that's the way it should be, right? The Garden of Eden should be the way forever that we should be living, right? If we didn't blow it. So let's take your question and put it the other way around. If we're supposed to be living in the Garden of Eden, how do we earn anything? If we have, isn't the Garden of Eden a place with no suffering? So would that be the flip side of a little bit of what you're asking, right? The answer, I think, would be we would still have to eat bread, but not with sweat, not with physical sweat. We would have to earn our bread by listening to God. And that wouldn't stop being a challenge. Right? That wouldn't stop being a struggle. In fact, it was a struggle that Adam and Eve actually immediately failed. What would have continued to be the case in the Garden of Eden if Adam and Eve, taking the Zohar image, if they would have passed that test, right, where God says, don't eat from that tree. So then what would have been the next day's test? What would have been the test after that? I have no idea. But if we take the story as a running story, then we can imagine that there would be other tests to withstand. I want to go the opposite way. When we have this Shabbos, we have the Torah reading Re'eh. One of the pieces that's mentioned in the Torah reading is Shemitah, is the 7th year. So in other places, in this week's Torah reading, the discussion of Shemitah is about helping the poor and canceling debts and so on. But in other discussions, in Exodus and in Leviticus, Shmot and in Vayikra, the point of one of the pictures that we have is that we eat from whatever the world gives us. That for a whole year, we eat not from the sweat of our brow. The sweat of our brow is the curse. You're right, but earning a living is not the curse. Eating is not the curse. Finding sustenance is not the curse. So we would have been eating, and there would have been some other kind of challenge or obstacle that we would have had to try to endure. That's the way I would simply try to push away that question. All right. So we can put away Reb Chaim Vital. He did his work for us. And now we're going to continue reading in the Zohar. (277). Who would like to do the reading for us? Okay, Beryl, thank you.
He tests the righteous. Why? Rabbi Shimon said, because when the Blessed Holy One delights in righteous, what is written? Yud-He Vav-He delights in crushing him by disease. This has been established, but the reason is that the delight of the Blessed Holy One focuses only on soul, not on body, for soul resembles soul, while body is incapable of uniting above, even though the body's image abides in supernal mystery.
Yeah.
When the Blessed Holy One delights in a person's soul, deriving pleasure from her, he strikes the body so that the soul can dominate. For as long as soul corresponds with body, soul cannot prevail. But once the body is broken, soul becomes dominant.
Does this make everybody happy? So this is worse, right? This is directly, saying the kinds of words that Mark before was completely rejecting. And as I said, I hear exactly what he's saying. This is a very strong statement. It's about as clear as you can get it. That says, no, it's really good for you to have your body broken and crushed. That the body is bad. The body is the enemy of the soul. The soul has no chance in a healthy, body. The body will always deflect it and overcome it and overshadow it, and the only hope is to be a shattered physical specimen. I have to tell you that I'm very sad that this is Rabbi Shimon, because very often Rabbi Shimon, in the way that the Zohar goes, the different disciples say all kinds of things, and then Rabbi Shimon comes up with something that nobody else thought of, and it's sometimes something that really enlightens the eyes, so to speak. In this case, I don't feel that way, but here it is, and it is what it is. I do want to give as a background that this is something like what Rabbi Shimon says in the Talmudic story, which is, as we know, the basic myth, founding myth of the Zohar's whole story also. And Rabbi Shimon and his son run away from the Romans, and they go and hide in a cave for years and years and years. So they are sustained by miraculously a carob tree grows inside the cave, and a spring flows in the cave. So they have something to eat, they have something to drink, not by the sweat of their brow at all. And they're buried up to their neck in the earth, in the sand, while they learn Torah, and then they only get out of their self-burial when they daven. They get up, they put on their clothes, they daven, then they take their clothes off so that they shouldn't get used up, and they go back and they bury themselves. By the time they come out after all that whole story, without reviewing the whole story, and of course the story is about the question of creating a balance between the Roman physical civilization and the Rabbi's intellectual, spiritual civilization. But Rabbi Shimon, the end of the story says that he came to wash in the public baths, and he was a complete wreck. His body was cracked open. His skin was totally destroyed by this ordeal, and just being washed by the waters was excruciatingly painful for him. And one of the rabbis that was with him taking care of him in the baths was crying. that Rabbi Shimon had such terrible pain and suffering. And Rabbi Shimon said to him, "Don't cry. You should be happy, because it's thanks to this suffering that I attained all of the mystical, spiritual, wisdom and learning that I got during all those years. I'm not the same Rabbi Shimon that I was when I went into the cave, and the breaking of my body is the corollary to the building up of my spirit." So, it doesn't quite say it in the same way as it says it here. Here it's generalized. There he's saying it as a personal statement. Again, bringing up the whole question we just had before about does a person themselves have the right to say this kind of obscene stuff about themselves? I don't know. But here Rabbi Shimon is taking that one step further and telling everybody else that it applies to everybody. And yes, it's very horrible, and it's terrible that he says it, but there it is. There it is. All right. Any other comments? We continue.
He tests the righteous. What does this mean? As is said, a tested stone. Similarly, he tests the righteous, strengthening him like this tested stone, which is a precious cornerstone. So too, he tests the righteous.
So in the verse in Isaiah, Isaiah's vision is that God is promising that God will make a new reestablished house of God and a house for the Jewish people. And I'm putting an Evan Bochen, this tested stone that will not shatter, it will not be destroyed anymore. It's completely, what do they say about like metal and stuff? It's tested. So also, you could also say distinguished, right? It's something that that shows itself to be, uniquely noticeable compared to all the run-of-the-mill stones. So that's what happens here with the righteous as well. By being tested, they become precious and even more special. Okay, finished with the righteous. Now back to the wicked.
But the wicked and one who loves violence, Sanah
nafsho.
Thank you. His soul hates. What does Sanah nafsho mean? Would you ever imagine that the soul of the Blessed Holy One hates the wicked one? Rather, that rung upon which all souls depend hates the soul of that wicked one, not wanting her at all, neither in this world nor in the world that is coming. So the wicked and one who loves violence, Sanah nafsho, she hates his soul precisely. Alternatively, Sanah nafsho, his soul hates. As is said, Yud-He Vav-He Elohim has sworn by his soul. So he tests the righteous.
Okay. So the two readings here are asking the question. When it says his soul hates, maybe it means he hates his soul. Who's the his? What is the his pronoun referring to? Is it to the wicked person? Is it to God? If it's to God, what part of God? Can we say that God actually hates a soul? So this is the idea here, that can you imagine the soul of the Blessed Holy One hating that wicked one? No. Rather, that rung upon which all souls depend, hates the soul of that wicked one. So this means that, and if you look in the note, look at 150.
That rung upon which all souls depend hates the soul. All souls derive from Shekhinah, characterized by din, judgment. She hates the soul of the wicked.
So the Holy Blessed One doesn't hate the soul. That's the Kudsha Brichu. But something in Shekhinah does. And this comes back to what I was saying before about that din is inherent in the creation of the soul itself. Judgment is what creates the differentiation of one soul from another. So din creates the whole problem of judging one's worthiness and one's desert. So in that sense, what the Zohar is saying is that piece of God hates what this wicked one has done to their soul. The wicked one has taken a soul that was supposed to be going out into the world and fulfilling itself and fulfilling the world, and instead the wicked person has completely destroyed the raison d'etre of their own soul, and that's what God hates. So if you look at the translations in the English, the end of the next to last paragraph, she hates his soul with a capital S, right? With a capital S. She, the Shekhinah. The next one, alternatively, his soul hates. Then we have he, his soul hates, right? With a capital H. So because God takes it personal. Right? God takes it as a complete slap in the face, literally, of what God has tried to do. So God is revolted by what the wicked person has done with that gift, which in the beginning, if we talk about Reb Chaim Vital, in the beginning is pending justification, and in the end, the wicked person takes away all possibility of the soul justifying itself. All right, we turn the page.
Come and see, when the Blessed Holy One created Adam, he commanded him for his own good and endowed him with wisdom, whose rungs he climbed. Descending below, he discovered the craving of the evil impulse and clung to it, forgetting all he had attained of the supernal glory of his Lord.
Okay, so this is, in short, a description about the problem that Adam had. How do we understand this? Does somebody want to try to rephrase this? We have a little bit of a picture here of Adam being given a command for his own good, right? And that meant that it would be for his own good to abide by that command. That would have been, to use Rabbi Chaim Vital's imagery before, that would have been a way for Adam to, keep earning brownie points, right? And he also endowed him with wisdom, whose rungs he climbed. So he's going up through the levels of divine wisdom, which is very, very high, right? Chokhmah. And then in exploring the wisdom, he discovered the craving of the evil impulse and clung to it, forgetting all he had attained. So this is this sense of completely losing all that he had already achieved, right? That he was a contender, right? He was doing okay. He was blossoming. He was growing, but in his expansion of his grasp, he encounters the craving of the evil impulse, and he holds on to that instead. Instead of using his wisdom to neutralize that, to put it in context, put it in its proper place, to recognize it for what it is. Instead, he followed it, and he clung to the evil impulse rather than clinging to God. Right? This is dveikut. This is the term. We have it in this Shabbos Torah reading. We had it last week. This is what God wants of us, to stick with God, right? Cling to God. And instead, what Adam does is he descends, and he never gets back up again. Then came Noah.
So the question is whether mankind, humankind, are constantly ascending and descending.
Like the angels on Jacob's ladder.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Am I wrong to read it that he was worse off at the end for having the knowledge? He would have been better off without the knowledge?
He would have had different knowledge. Yes, that would have been better. Right? He was endowed with wisdom already. Right? That's part of what is being said here. The wisdom that he was endowed with was the good divine wisdom that would have taken up him higher and higher.
But was that the problem as well?
Say that again?
But is that the problem? Would he have been better off without the wisdom?
For sure. Without which wisdom?
Without the wisdom that he was endowed with, would he not have descended?
So and then what would he have been? What kind of situation would he have been in?
I don't know, but I'm just questioning whether the wisdom was helpful.
So, this is, again, I said before, what if we just became happy vegetables? When the sun shines, we soak it up, we create our chlorophyll, and we just do whatever comes naturally. That would, that job is taken already.
It also goes back to what we were saying before about, was Eden really that idyllic?
Mm-hmm.
Was it all benevolence and no malevolence, or,
Well, so that's where we get the serpent, right?
Right.
He's in there too.
And
so,
if Eden's what the world to come is going to be.
Yeah, keep going.
So if Eden has the serpent and malevolence, and that's what we're all striving for, that's the perfect, the perfect world to come. How perfect is that?
Right. So in other words,
how does it not become, Groundhog Day? Right.
So is the serpent going to just start all over again in the world to come? Right.
If not that serpent, some other incarnation.
The serpent with a capital S. That's the thing. Right. Exactly. And the answer is no. The answer is that's what's going to have to eventually be accomplished, is the defeat of the serpent. Right? That's the way that the image is supposed to work. Could it actually be conceivable that we could get to that point? That's a very, very, very big stretch of the imagination. And it requires either to be really naive and stupid, or to be full of faith. And you can evaluate it one way or the other. I don't know.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right. Noah. Then came Noah.
Yeah, I'm just unmuting myself. Then came Noah. At first is written, Noah was a completely righteous man. Later, he descended below and saw strong wine, unclarified, 1 day old. He drank some of it, became drunk, and exposed himself. Then came Abraham.
Wait. Let's give Noah a little bit of attention. So what do we see here about Noah? We have an example of a person who's completely righteous and then blows it. right? It never says that Adam was righteous, but that's part of the myth that we just created. But with Noah, it's explicit, right? He was Noach ish tzaddik tamim haya bedorotav, completely righteous person, and God even says that I've seen you to be such a completely righteous person, and I'm saving you, right? And God saves Noah, but then he saw strong wine, unclarified, 1 day old. Okay, if you look at 154.
Strong wine, unclarified, 1 day old, new, murky wine whose lees had not yet settled. These dregs symbolize the demonic. The phrase hamra
Takif.
takif, strong wine, can also mean fermented, vinegary wine. But the rendering here seems preferable since fermented wine is old. Noah found a vine that had been banished from the Garden of Eden, along with its clusters. He took of its fruit and ate and desired them in his heart. He planted a vineyard with it. That same day, its fruit flourished. He drank of its wine and was exposed in the tent.
Okay, so this comes back to Rich's point. Look at what we have here as the explanation for this this vine. It was a vine that was thrown out of the Garden of Eden, right? In the attempt to prune out the weeds in the Garden of Eden and keep the Garden of Eden a perfectly idyllic place, right? All we did was we ended up throwing it into the rest of the world, right? So we dump our garbage one place, and it ends up then surfacing someplace else. So the vine that was this rejected, bad vine, this weed, survives the flood, and this is the one that Noah ends up picking, and then Noah goes with it. Right? He should have known better, but it was so tempting that he couldn't resist, and he takes it, and this powerful force, here the term demonic is constantly used, right? Demonic simply means truly evil, right? This is a piece of true evil, and the dregs of the wine represent that. Of course, in Zohar's color theory, which is a common theory among other people, red is bad, right? So red wine theoretically is red, blood, violence, evil, and the coagulated bad stuff is the dregs, the lees. So here, 1 day old, and it didn't have a chance yet to separate out, and he grabs it. And what this says about the human being is that the best, most righteous human being can never be guaranteed to be safe. Right? To the very last moment, they have to be vigilant, because here's this completely righteous man, the man whose merit saved all of humanity. That savior then becomes just a disgusting drunk from the perspective of the Zohar. He exposes himself. He's rolling around. He has no control. He's lost his Tzelem Elokim. He's lost his human dignity. He's lost anything positive about him, because he's given himself over completely to these other powers, and is no longer in control of himself, right? So that's Noah. So we've got 2 strikes so far. Then came Abraham.
He ascended in wisdom, contemplating the glory of his Lord. Afterwards, there was a famine in the land, and Avram went down to Egypt. Subsequently, what is written? Avram went up from Egypt, ascending to the rung he had attained at first. He entered in peace and emerged in peace.
Okay. So this, of course, is in short the story that we read, for pages and pages in the Zohar. And this is the image that the Zohar has of Abraham finally being the one who can go down, be immersed, and encounter evil in its fullest, and resist it, right? And struggle with it, and then come out at the other end. Just at the end, he entered in peace and emerged in peace. Look at the at note 158.
He entered in peace and emerged in peace. The expression derives from the famous account of the four rabbis who engaged in mystical search.
Four entered Pardes.
Four entered Pardes, an orchard, whence paradise. Ben Azai glimpsed and went mad. Ben Zoma glimpsed and died. Aher, Elisha, son of Avuya, glimpsed and severed the saplings. Rabbi Akiva entered in peace and emerged in peace. See Tosef.
All right, etc., etc. The expression is applied to Abraham in the Midrash. So this idea of entering in peace and exiting, emerging in peace, is the phrase that's used to describe how difficult it is to stay whole and stay healthy in the mystical quest. In that particular story about the four sages who entered paradise, only Rabbi Akiva succeeded. Entering in peace and emerging in peace is then, by extension, a term that applies to all of the mystical adepts of the Zohar. Those are the ones who can enter and emerge, who can go in and go out. Of course, once you phrase it that way, there's a certain erotic quality to that as well. But Abraham is the one who was able the first to accomplish this. Right? Egypt represents the region of evil, of betraying God through magic and demonic forces and so on. He goes down there, he struggles with it, and then he comes back up and is all the better and stronger for it. So he shows that it's doable, because so far we've had just example after example of people failing to be able to do it. Okay? And now we finally get the punchline of what this whole long discussion was coming to.
Then came Isaac. What is written? There was a famine in the land, and Isaac went. Isaac went and later ascended from there in peace.
Okay. So the parallelism is now extended. There was a famine. The Torah tells us not the same famine of Abraham, but Isaac's unique famine, his own unique experience, his own unique challenge. And he has to go, and he has to go into the land of the Philistines, not the land of the Egyptians. The land of the Philistines, also a bad area, bad neighborhood. He has to encounter all of that evil, and then he has to come back out again. And he does. So this is the testing of the righteous. And we've got two righteous people who flunked the tests, Adam and Noah. And then we have two righteous people who passed the test, Abraham and Isaac. Let's get to the last two lines.
Every single one of the righteous is tested by the Blessed Holy One to elevate them in this world and in the world that is coming.
Okay, so this is the final conclusion of this little piece. That it's not just these biblical figures. Every single one of the righteous has some kind of test that they have to endure, and they have to triumph over, so that they can be the word nace, right? So that they can be lifted up, be a banner in this world and in the world that is coming. And this, of course, is finally when we get the world that is coming over here. This is what gives the material for Rabbi Chaim Vital to talk about this as the world that is coming is the ultimate place where this testing is played out, is finally justified. We didn't quite have this earlier in the Zohar. Just for a half a second, what on the one hand we have a parallelism between Abraham and Isaac. On the other hand, there's a little bit of a difference, right? Isaac is not quite Abraham, right? Isaac is a lesser figure in many ways. He doesn't descend all the way down to Egypt. He is stopped by God. God says, no, I'm not letting you leave the land of Israel. I'm not letting you leave this holy land. And remember, Abraham was not able to connect up with God completely until he got to that land, because it was just foreclosed that he could possibly get that close, that he could possibly get that clinging that we're talking about until he gets to the land. So Isaac is actually given a little extra help here, right? Isaac is not quite tested in the same way that Abraham was tested before. And of course, I'm eliminating the whole question of his being tested at the at the Akedah. Right? This particular kind of test is different. But again, going back to Reb Chaim Vital, his claim that all the righteous are tested according to their ability to withstand the test is, of course, not true. Not just empirically, we know that this is not true, but we also see that Adam and Noah were tested and didn't make it. Right. So Reb Chaim Vital's harmonious picture about how all of this suffering works out to everybody's good only you only get the right dosage of suffering depending on who you are, the right doses of testing. Let's be more exact in the word here. Doesn't seem to bear up, right? Unless you take the test here out of God's hands. Unless you take the test out of God's hands and you put it into the hands of Adam and Noah. Adam chose of his own free will to cling to the evil impulse, didn't he? Noah chose of his own free will to cultivate that wine and drink it. So whatever problems that they got afterwards, it's hard to say, well, God gave them those problems. They gave themselves the problems, no? Anybody ever thought about this? So I'm bringing up, again, another piece of unclarity, so to speak. When we talk about the testing and how much it comes into struggle and suffering, where and when are we talking about suffering and testing that's produced by God and directed at a person or a group or the world? And when are we talking about tests and suffering that God has nothing to do with, that we produce on our own? I don't have an answer to, I don't have a criterion to say one way or the other how things go.
Is it even appropriate to bring up Job?
Go ahead.
Job?
Yeah. So say it out.
So there are two things about Job. One is, of course, that he did nothing to deserve his fate. The second thing is that there's enormous collateral damage. There's, he gets his family and, he gets his ducks again and his sheep and his cows. But his original family was just collateral damage. So the parts of the Torah that you never talk about, Rabbi, in your weekly Zohar.
That's not true.
No.
Rarely, not never, rarely.
Yeah, the parts of the Torah are the parts that all have to do with the collateral damage. So this week's portion had a tremendous amount of collateral damage before we get to the wonderful things about treating slaves nicely and Shemitah and all of that. And the collateral damage creates the image that becomes eventually Christian anti-Semitism. And
How does that work?
People get punished for not worshiping the right God in the right way. You're not allowed to know somebody else's God. So if you're in medieval Catholicism, then Jews are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, all of these ideas are there also. The idea of, but what I'm especially fixated on is the idea of collateral damage. So, people mess up, Korach messes up, and then in a sort of by your leave, 24,000 people die of a plague. And that's where this image of justice really breaks down for me completely. Because I can understand the importance of wanting to purify the righteous. But what about all of the collateral damage? So, there's a famine in the land. Well, a famine kills thousands of people. Okay, so that's why I bring up Job. Because Job is a clear case where he's punished on nothing but a whim, a bet between God and the devil, and then with no particular mention, the story just accepts the fact that when God is messing around, a lot of people who have nothing really to do with the main character, all of the spear holders, the chorus girls, they will get to starve to death. So, all right. So again, I said I wouldn't talk anymore, but I can't control myself very much.
It's okay. It's okay. So Job is actually written to be absolutely clear in creating this problem, right? Job is pulls no punches about saying, well, maybe it's not really from God, maybe it's from some other factor, or maybe he did something wrong. That's of course what all of his friends try to explain, and God irately says, "Shut up, no." So Job is actually really completely dedicated to creating the worst possible scenario that you can, in asking this question, and the answer in the end is we don't know. We don't know how to answer this question. We don't know. Right?
I don't think that's the answer, Rabbi. I think the answer, I sent you a note, weeks ago.
Okay.
And I said, the only person who has ever given a satisfactory answer is Spinoza. Because Spinoza said, God is infinite. And among his infinite attributes is what we perceive of as evil. So evil shrinks to insignificance if you see God as infinite. Now that's basically the answer in Job. Because the answer to Job is, Pisha, where were you when I made the world? And so when you look at the world, the universe, in its total grandeur, then evil doesn't cease to exist, but it shrinks to insignificance, or at least that was Spinoza's answer. And of course, he was deemed a heretic for having that answer, because it does something terrible to the place of humanity in the scheme of things. It's just a sideshow of a sideshow of a sideshow.
Right. Well, I didn't hear that answer worked for you so well, whatever it was, 15 minutes ago. I think that is of the essence of being a human being. I think that's where, the Job answer, I don't think the Job answer is the Spinoza answer, the book of Job's answer. I don't think God is saying Spinoza's answer. I think God is saying, I'm not going to answer you. I don't think it's because I think that in the end, all of the horrible things that you brought up before, I don't think get answered by Spinoza. I don't think I think that's unfortunately, it's an abstract, mathematical, heartless kind of answer that is meaningless in the real world.
No, but he says that the essence of being a human being is to suffer for your feelings. And the solution to suffering is to realize that it is only a small part of the total cosmos. That doesn't make it less important in terms of the human being, but it certainly places it in perspective. So if you take if you take seriously a scientific worldview, then this stuff that's going on here is such an infinitesimal part, but at the same time, it is such a miraculous part. And so then you have to accept all of the cost of having this miracle.
I think that brings us back a little bit to the question of consciousness that I was mentioning before. What's the point of the consciousness? If consciousness, is the whole point of the consciousness is that we should end up just recognizing that we don't count? The consciousness, that's the tragedy of consciousness that I think is part of what's underlying Reb Chaim Vital's first image. The soul, each soul exists by virtue of its own individual consciousness. That consciousness is not there to be destroyed or dismissed. And that's the root of the possibility of suffering. So yeah, we could do the smoothing it out and go transcend that sense of self. You're not that important. Who the heck do you think you are? The answer is, I am the person who's in excruciating pain right now, or I am the person who just lost my most dear, beloved person, and my heart is broken. All the collateral damage that you're talking about. That's what I'm saying. Everything that you said before, to me, none of the Spinoza stuff actually addresses adequately, because that reality is our reality, and it's not redeemed by being able to encompass a really well wrought intellectual system. So if I'm dancing on both sides of the aisle here, then so be it. But I do acknowledge exactly all the stuff that you were saying before as being really, really, really importantly meaningful, and that it doesn't get brushed aside by the mathematics of infinity versus me. Then don't make me. That's the question. That's the theodicy question in the end. All right, we'll stop here. And we'll continue with more clarification of the world next week.